It is so great to catch up with my next guest, Mr. American Top Team himself, Dan Lambert, who has absolutely been killing it on AEW these days, and of course is one of the most notable names in the MMA industry. Dan, how are you today? How's everything?
I'm good, man. How are you doing?
Doing awesome. I was telling you off air, man, been a huge fan of what you've been doing on AEW. The last time you and I did an interview, it was when you were just sort of an AEW fan and going to the shows. At what point did you start getting implemented into the shows, and how did that all come together?
They were doing a Miami show, and I was talking to Tony Khan, who's been a friend of mine for a while, and he thought it would be cool to get a couple of fighters over there to do an appearance. And then it was just, hey, you want to talk and talk a little smack and see how it goes? And I was like, yeah. And I ended up in the ring, did a little promo, got smashed by Lance Archer, thought it was a one-off. And a couple weeks later, Tony's like, hey, you want to come back and cut another one? And just kind of went from there.
How did that compare to when you were on Impact a little while, like years ago, like being in AEW? Because obviously AEW is like the hot thing right now. They're talking about it being sort of the WCW, in the 90s to WWE. What was that first show like, getting to do that?
It's different because the crowds, most of the Impact shows were taped up at Universal Studios, where it's more of people coming there just to get out of the hot and the sun and get into some AC, and they're not really wrestling fans there for the wrestling, whereas you go to an AEW show and there's some rabid AEW fans in there, so they're more familiar with the storylines and who you are, so the reactions are a little different.
Yeah, and like I said, casual pro wrestling fan here. I used to watch a lot when I was a kid, but Bobby Heenan, would you say that's who you're people sort of remind you of in terms of your character and what you're like on AEW?
I don't know. I'm a fan of a lot of the old school managers. Bobby Heenan's, probably one of, if not the greatest manager of all time, along with Jim Cornette. So, if that comparison ever was made, that'd be a compliment.
And I love the angle as well. You're sort of going against millennials and wokeness and all this, and that's right up my alley as well. I love seeing all that stuff. Has there been any backlash of that outside the ring? I know it's pro wrestling and it's scripted and stuff, but you know how we are in today's society these days.
I don't know what you mean by backlash. I mean, I'm sure some people don't like it and some people don't like you, regardless, based on what you say. That's just kind of the way the political divides come in this country and probably all over the world for that matter. I don't give a fuck.
Of course you don't. That's why we like talking to you here as well. And then I read something on Fightful Select, actually. It's a company I used to work for. I know they talked to a bunch of other people in AEW, and I will read the quote here. They said, Dan Lambert has been nothing short of wonderful backstage. How great is it to hear that, just being in a new industry and having the respect of your peers?
Oh, I'm a mark. I've been a fan a long time. So I'm backstage and I'm looking at Jake Roberts and Arn Anderson and Dean Malenko walking around as agents, and then some of the big name wrestlers that they have that I've been a fan of for a long time. So it's just really cool for me. I know there's a group of people out there that, MMA people that hate pro wrestling and pro wrestling people that hate MMA. I think it comes down to a respect issue, and some people don't feel like they're respected by the other group, and that leads to the feelings, which I get. I think if you go in there and you show them respect, they show it to you. And I think they appreciate that.
Now, let me get this straight. I was trying to keep tabs of who you brought along with you to a lot of these shows. Andre Arlovsky, Kayla Harrison, Amanda Nunes, Paige Van Zandt, Austin Vanderford, Junior Dos Santos. Did I miss anyone there? There's been a lot of fighters. Masvidal, of course. How could I forget him? Jorge Masvidal. Is there anyone else I'm missing that you've also brought over from the MMA world?
Dalton Rosta. He's
that's right. Bellator. Yep.
He's an undefeated, good prospect of ours. I think he's like 6-0 right now.
Yeah. So is that them coming to you saying they want to go, or are you kind of just bringing them along? Like, how does that all work out?
I mean, I'm at the gym every day, and there's a lot of people at the gym that watch pro wrestling or have seen the little snippets pop up, and I've had a ton of them come up and say, holy shit, that looks really fun. Let's go. Or a couple of them went and came back and were talking to the other fighters. So I've had a lot of fighters at the gym say, man, take me with you. That looks like a lot of fun.
Who's enjoyed it the most out of all the fighters, do you think?
Probably Andre Arlovsky. He just wants to punch somebody. He's like, man, when do I get to punch somebody? When do I get to punch somebody? He is all about it.
Is there any talks from AEW of making this like a permanent thing with a lot of these guys? Because again, like if Arlovsky's into it, and I know, he's still with the UFC, is that something that's been discussed? If these guys actually, like, I know you make little, sort of promos on the shows, but for them actually being like a full-fledged pro wrestler, is that something that's ever been talked about with some of these fighters?
It's pretty much week to week with what's going on. I'm basically just open to whatever AEW wants to do. When they wanted the guys to get involved the other week, it's just a matter of calling up and letting the promoters know that they work for, that we're going to be doing something. And I've got pretty good relationships with everybody in the business. So there's no hangups there. So if they wanted an Andre or a JDS to get involved in a match, they just have to ask. And I think those two would probably love doing it.
I know we talked about Arlovsky being sort of the biggest fan of the entire experience. Is there anyone that's actually taking this seriously and being like, hey, Dan, hook me up here. Let's make this a reality?
If I told you a couple of the names that when they left the arena said, man, I think I'd like to do this more than I like doing MMA, you'd probably be surprised. It's a lot of fun, and the reactions that you get from the fans at a pro wrestling show are a lot different than you get at an MMA show. And I think it was somewhat refreshing for a couple of the guys to get there and get to play off the fans and, not be totally consumed with being there for a fight and everything that goes along with that. So they all had a really good time.
I don't know if we go into too much detail on this, but are they getting compensated for this, or is it just about being at the show and just getting the exposure?
I don't want to get into that. They're just, for the most part, it's a lot of fun. Depending on their level of involvement, where it is and where it goes. Then we can talk about that. But right now, it's more of having a good time and just getting away and enjoying a night out.
And you mentioned having good relationships with everyone. Did you have to speak to the UFC with some of those fighters about them appearing on a different network and doing the pro wrestling thing? Was that something that you had to clear?
Yeah, I would never. I mean, I've got Bellator guys on there. I had PFL guys on there, girls. I bare knuckle, and I had UFC. And I would never put anybody in a situation where they could run afoul of a contract. So I just reached out and said, hey, just so you know, we're going to do this. You guys got a problem with this? And nobody had a problem with it.
Yeah, I don't think ESPN is a pro wrestling promotion that is going to rival that or anything. So I think you're safe there, which is good. Is there anyone that hasn't come out yet that you want to see try out pro wrestling, at least as an appearance? Is there anyone at the gym right now you're thinking of?
I've had a bunch of people at the gym say, hey, let me get in there. I want to get in there and do something. So I don't know how long it's going to go. I don't know how long we're going to be there or what direction, they want to steer it in. So I guess it's just a wait and see. Can
you give me one name of someone that's interested that hasn't done it yet?
I've probably had a half a dozen or a dozen of the people at the gym. So, it's pretty much everybody would love to do something. Mm-hmm. I don't have any names that jump out at me as, they're dying to do it, or I think they'd be a really good fit. The ones that popped up, at first are the ones that I grabbed and went.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. And just last thing on kind of that group, is there anyone in that group, we talked about Arlovsky being a fan of it. Is there anyone in that group you think would excel in pro wrestling that sort of stands out? Kayla comes to mind just with her strength and everything else. Obviously she's with PFL, but who do you think out of that group would be very successful in pro wrestling?
I think Masvidal obviously would be successful in anything that requires some charisma and some popularity because he's such a big star. If you saw Kayla get in the ring when she was there for that one little spot we did, she was, for someone who was anti-pro wrestling before she went, she got into it pretty damn quick. And she's got a lot of charisma and she's got some attitude to go along with it. She's kind of an asshole. So I think she could be effective at that. I think Arlovsky and JDS, because they're big, scary dudes. And, when they jumped in there, they took to it pretty well. I think they could both do well as on it. I think Austin Vanderford dropped a couple bombs on Jericho. He actually busted him up a little bit the hard way. So I thought he did well. I thought Dustin looked great. I thought Dalton looked great. He hit that big double leg on Jake, which looked good. I thought they all did well, and I think they could all succeed in it. But again, you don't just walk into pro wrestling and, become a star or do something well. It takes those guys years and years to hone their craft, just like it takes someone years and years to hone a craft in MMA. So, protecting them and putting them in the right situation, I think they can get across well. But if someone says, I'm going to become a full-time pro wrestler, that's a pretty daunting task. I think you can just walk in and do well at that.
Yeah, no, we've seen Ronda Rousey and so many other fighters. Well, I shouldn't say so many, but there's not many that can go there and find the success. Ronda Rousey was a bit of an exception, just with her brand already being as strong as it was, and everything else sort of going over. But back up for a second. You just mentioned Kayla Harrison. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
You mentioned Ronda. She was also a unicorn in the ring. She took to that shit like a fish to water. I'm trying to think somebody else who made such a smooth transition into pro wrestling and got so good in the ring so quick. Maybe Kurt Angle did. But most people, you see the growing pains, and some other parts of her character people may or may not have liked. Her mic skills people may have criticized a little bit, but man, in the ring she took to that really quick. She was pretty good.
What I was going to say was you mentioned Kayla Harrison not being a pro wrestling fan. So what convinced her? What changed her mind? Was it just bringing her out to the show, or why was she so anti pro wrestling before this?
I think she comes from that Olympic mentality of, it's all about the love of the game and the sport. And I want to be the best. And, then I'm going to transfer that into MMA. And I don't even know if I want to get into MMA because a lot of those guys talk shit and they go, shut up, just get in there and give it a try. And it took her like 4.5 seconds walking out there and getting the reaction to be like flexing her muscles and kissing her biceps and fake crying to the fans and cussing back at them when they were cussing at her. She jumped into it pretty quick. So again, I think a lot of the people that don't like it, and shit all over it, really haven't had an opportunity to experience it and get into it. And I think it goes both ways. I think a lot of the wrestling fans that just say, screw MMA, I hate MMA. I don't think they ever gave MMA a chance because they feel like some of the people in MMA might not respect their sport as well.
Someone else who's been tied to pro wrestling is Colby Covington. I know, this is mainly a pro wrestling interview, but I did want to just bring him up. Do you still keep in touch with Colby at all? Obviously, he's finally getting his rematch against Usman, but he's always been linked to pro wrestling for the last couple of years.
Yeah, I haven't talked to Colby in quite a while. It's, when you're in the gym every day and you see the people in the gym every day, that's who you communicate with. And when they're gone and they're on another team or, talking smack between your gym and their gym, it's like, kind of out of sight, out of mind. But yeah, that's a hell of a fight. Colby gave Usman his by far greatest test, and I'll be watching that one. That's going to be a good one.
And do you think there's any possibility if he loses, because that's a tough loss, it would be 2 losses to the current champ, that we could see that pro wrestling career accelerated? I know Colby is a competitor. He probably would like to stay in MMA, but do you see him, potentially making that move sooner rather than later? Because he'd be in a tough spot losing to the champ twice if he does lose.
I have no idea. I really can't speak to what's going on with him, and especially in the MMA world. You might say, "Oh man, you just suffered your second loss. You're done. What are you going to do now? You better find something to do." I mean, when Dustin Poirier had his fight with Khabib and lost that fight, it was kind of the same situation. He's gone through such a huge road and beat so many big names and got the interim title, and he had his shot and then he lost it. Oh shit, what's he going to do now? And 2 monster fights with Conor McGregor later, he's fighting for the belt again. Yeah. So it's a tough sport when things aren't going your way, but it's one that can turn around really quick too.
You're good friends with Matt Hughes. I happen to notice his son is fighting MMA in an MMA fight. I think his second amateur fight coming up here in a little bit. Does he train at I believe he does train at the gym or something. I was kind of seeing something about that on social media.
Yeah, he does. He came down with his dad, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 months ago. They just wanted to come down and hang out for a week. So they were down hanging out and he was training at the gym. And I told him, hey, anytime you want to come back, just give me a call. We have a dorm here. You're always welcome to stay. He's Matt's kid. He can do whatever he wants to do at my gym. And he reached out to me about a month later and said, I want to move down. You still got that room for me? So he's been down. He's training. He's doing well.
That's good to hear. Yeah, I happen to notice, and that's Pat Militich's promotion, or he's part of that promotion that's going to be he's going to be fighting for. I was noticing that as well. Okay, got to end in some pro wrestling as well. I mentioned it there, AEW, a lot of steam right now. Again, as a casual fan outside looking in, there's a lot of momentum with AEW. Do you see this rivalry right now with AEW and the WWE sort of being like it was with WCW back in the 90s? Do you feel that way right now?
Man, I'd like to think that's what's going to happen. I mean, when you think back to the Monday Night Wars and how good it was, and everybody felt the need to try to keep stepping up their product and nobody could be complacent anymore. It's kind of like when you're running a business and everything's going your way and people are buying everything. You're not really finding out a way to get more efficient or get better or get more innovative. But then when competition comes and you start feeling some heat, then you try to step your game up. So I would like to see, as a wrestling fan, I'd like to see that happen. I haven't seen it yet. From the WWE in the last couple of years. Maybe they were just a little cocky and didn't think AEW could start nipping at their heels, but I think they're doing more than nipping at heels. I mean, they beat them a couple weeks in a row in that key demographic. So I would imagine it's gotten their attention, and you would think they'd start making some changes. But, other than what they did at NXT, I haven't really seen anything on the main roster change yet. So I guess it remains to be seen.
What does the future look like for you? You kind of mentioned it a little bit earlier in the interview. It's sort of week by week, but it seems like you're a mainstay there, Dan. And how cool must that be as someone who's a lifelong pro wrestling fan?
It's super cool. I mean, I was one of their shows before we did a couple promos just because Tony's a buddy of mine, and, I can get in and hang out in the back and talk to him and talk to some of the guys and see the matches. So, it's super cool doing something with them. Again, I don't know how long it's going to last or not last. I've got the MMA side, which will probably be part of my life for my next 35 years or so, knock on wood that I'm around. And however long Tony wants us to come and take part, we'll take part.
Have you been watching Dark Side of the Ring? I missed last week's episode, but the week before with the Ric Flair, the plane ride from hell. I remember hearing about that and then actually seeing what actually occurred on there. That was totally nuts. Did you see it, that episode?
I did. And, I had read all about it in the Observer, up, down, and sideways, and it's been brought up again over the years. But holy shit.
I know.
That's a really well done show. It's a really well done show. And it's amazing. It gets some eyeballs because there were a lot of people talking and a lot of reactions to it, and then a lot of reactions to people who had reactions. And, that was back then, man, the wrestling world was it was crazy. And I bring old wrestlers down and we have dinner with them and they tell us stories from back in the 70s and 80s and on the road. And it's just, the stories are mind boggling.
Yeah, no, it certainly was. And some great stories here today, Dan. Thanks so much for doing this. Always a pleasure. Something a bit different, right? Usually talking MMA. This time we're getting into pro wrestling. If there's anything you want to mention before we get out of here, I always give my guests the last word. So the floor is yours.
Nope, I'm good. Just having a good time.